Welcome back, everyone. This is Money Mixology. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining again today, listening. I appreciate it. I was originally going to have an entirely different topic that I had on my mind to cover today. And then I received an email into the info line. So again, info@moneymixology.com if you're interested in sending in a question or a comment, or there's a topic you'd like me to cover. And this question was, unfortunately, in some ways, very similar to one I receive pretty often when I deal with students, when I deal with members of the public, former clients, whatever the case may be. It's a version of, what can I do to become wealthy when I have these tough fill in the blank situation? Or I was never raised with money, or I have no idea how money works. Whatever the case for that person happens to be, it's always some version of thinking of themselves as less, thinking of themselves as undeserving of becoming wealthy, however the phrasing happens to come out for that particular request. And so it brings me to the question that I do want to address today, and I want us to dive into. What is it that makes wealthy people special? What is it that allowed them to get rich? What background did they have? What advantages were they given as they were growing up? How is it that they found the right avenue or the right pathway and became wealthy when others didn't? Why is it that only a few of us ever find that path? Is there something I can do to sort of put myself on that journey? In order to address this and really ground us in the conversation, I want to go back to one of our psychology topics. Now, to be clear, this is not a clinical psychology type of term where it's in the DSM, that type of thing. Instead, this is one that we just use in common vernacular. Many people have heard of it. It's called the imposter syndrome. So, imposter syndrome is essentially when you feel unworthy or unready for something, even when the facts and the evidence show that you have earned it or you are ready. And I think this happens for a lot of people across many, many spectrums. In fact, from just a pure clinical perspective, it happens to every single person at some point in their life, unless you happen to be a complete narcissist who believes you've earned and deserve everything in the world. But for normal people, everyone's going to face these. Let's start with a few examples from non-money, as we like to do here, just to give us an idea of where it plays into our overall life. I think one of the really common ones is job promotions. This is something that people early in their professional career, and perhaps even as they grow into their professional career, really struggle with imposter syndrome when they get that first big promotion. Sure, the raise is nice, the title bump is nice, but many people have that nagging sense of being found out as a fraud. I'm going to take this promotion, and am I really going to be able to do the job? And this runs counter to all of the evidence that they have available. They were great in their current position. They've done everything they were asked to do. The people that they look up to in the organization are the ones who chose them for this new role. You've trusted those people with every other decision that they've made. You've kind of wanted to end up in their position. You respected them so much, you wanted to grow into their professional abilities. And yet when they chose you, you began to question it. Am I really worthy? Am I capable? Again, this runs counter to all of the evidence you actually have available to you. This is where that imposter syndrome begins to work its way into your brain. Like that worm kind of gets in there and causes some havoc. Another example where I see this, and for those who may not be aware, my full-time job during the day, I work in the K-12 space. I have been in K-12 education for many, 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 many years. And one of the heartbreaking things that I witness on a regular basis is young people who come from underprivileged, underserved, disparate backgrounds, who, when the conversation of college comes up, it's an immediate pushback where they don't believe they're worthy, they don't believe they're capable. Yet that runs counter to everything they've proven to that point in their life. They've been really good students, they've gotten great grades, they've met all the requirements that would be necessary to go on to college. even if they overcome that imposter syndrome and make the jump and go to university, then they show up on campus and for their first semester, they still feel like an imposter. Inside, they feel like a fraud. They look around and they think all these other people here must be smarter than me. They must have done things I couldn't do, ignoring the reality that everyone went through the same admissions process. Everybody that's there earned their way in the same way. And yet we struggle to see ourselves in that light. And so that imposter syndrome just continues to work its way in our brain and undercut us when we think about whether or not we are worthy to do what we're doing. From a personal perspective, I think I can acknowledge that this entire podcast, this show, all of these things that I'm branching out into, I have imposter syndrome. It is certainly not in my comfort zone. It's not something that I would have thought I'd be good at. Even as I sit here and record this show now, I think, why am I doing this? There's got to be somebody better at this. There's got to be people more deserving of this. Yet my background and my history clearly point to the fact that I'm capable of doing this. I have the technical skills and the background and the experience, and I've taught for a long time. I'm comfortable with the material. All these things might be factually true, but it still doesn't overcome the idea I feel like a fraud in this world sometimes. When it comes to the social media podcasting, I think that that can be really, really tough for people. When we shift gears over to the money side, which is, as always, what we're here to discuss, imposter syndrome doesn't let up. This is still a nasty circumstance we have to try to overcome. And I'll give some advice on it in a moment. But let's address a few of the examples of when this can hit us hard. So I mentioned a little bit in the opening, and it's one of the ones I face a lot, which is some variation of I come from an underprivileged or poor background or whatever. My household wasn't wealthy. Nobody discussed money. We didn't have money. And so therefore I will never have money. I'm not a money person. My family's not a money family. I'll never understand it. I'll never overcome those deficits. I'll never be able to be wealthy. It's these negative thoughts that if I ever find myself around money, I'm an imposter. I'm a fraud. Therefore, a lot of times you'll end up self-sabotaging. You start to get out of that circumstance. You get your first job out of college and you start to make a little bit of money, and suddenly you don't know what to do because you're not supposed to be a money person. You're an imposter in that world. Again, even though the evidence doesn't support that. In fact, it supports the exact opposite of that. So it can be really hard for people to wrap their mind around having money for the first time. I always try my best to embed this in my children that they understand why money is so important, how it works, what it's like, trying to give them some basic tools to help them overcome that exact imposter syndrome, to make the jump to say, no, I can be a money person. My dad was a money person, but that's him. I myself can be a money person because I've learned some of the tools. I've got at least a baseline of knowledge. I've been exposed to it. Those types of things can help you overcome it a little bit. Another example of someone often struggling with the imposter syndrome is when you marry into money, when you go into a relationship with someone who has quite a bit of money that you never had. You're going to feel like an imposter in that situation. The first time you go to a family dinner and you recognize, or at least in your mind, you think everybody around you has tons of money, is fully put together, understands everything. You don't know anything. You don't belong there. This is obviously not your crowd of people. How did they let me in the door? I should definitely leave before I'm found out, kind of situation. And yet the evidence doesn't support that at all. Most of the people there may or may not have any idea how money works. There might be one person in the family who has wealth, and the rest of them could all be complete disasters themselves. They very likely don't care if you have any money because they probably don't even know. That sort of spotlight thing where you think everybody knows everything about you, and they probably have no idea. And yet you struggle with this idea that I just don't belong here. The last one that I want to highlight that can be really pervasive when it comes to money is the young people growing into the money and specifically around investing. And I mentioned my children and why I thought it was so important that I try to get them started early. This is also a situation I find a lot when I teach the young college students, the freshmen, 18, 19-year-olds. They've never been exposed to any kind of investing. No IRAs, obviously not 401ks yet, nothing like that. And in their mind, that's something that other people do, that wealthy older people do. They cannot ever get past that hurdle. And they view themselves, even when they're taking my personal finance course, they view themselves as less, as unworthy of learning it or of knowing how to use it, or it's just, I'm not a money person. I never will be a money person. And that message, that internal messaging, is so damaging to what you're trying to accomplish because it simply isn't true. I asked them very, very specifically to refer to the evidence that is in front of their face. What course are you sitting in? You are in a personal finance course. No one made you take this. You chose to sign up for this class, which means you are interested in learning. You are capable of learning. You actually are going to get ahead. You're going to learn the material. So, all of these tools you're beginning to equip yourself with over time. And that it runs completely contrary to this idea you keep having circle around in your head that you aren't knowledgeable, you aren't worthy, you're somehow a fraud. That isn't supported by anything that's happening in the real world around you. But this is something I want young people to hear is that, of course, you don't know the information yet, but that has nothing to do with it. The information is available. You can learn it. You will learn it. So there's no reason to in advance be upset and say, well, I'm just not good enough. I'll never be good enough. Well, no, not if you don't try. So we want to be able to get to that point. One of the things I want to do to help you jump past the imposter syndrome, or if you have someone in your life that you know is struggling, and the irony of me giving this show today, this information, is if you're listening to this show, you may or may not actually be suffering from imposter syndrome quite as badly because you're actively seeking out information. You're obviously interested in finance. I would assume you feel you can learn finance if you're listening to material about it. So, this could actually be something that benefits someone very close to you that you know is struggling with these thoughts, that they keep sabotaging themselves because they can't see themselves as a money person. So, I want to give you just a few facts. And there's a book that came out many years ago. It's been revised a few times called The Millionaire Next Door from Thomas Stanley. It's a great book conceptually. Now, some of the data is outdated. It has been updated a few times, but I'm going to give you essentially the current figures. And what this book does is explains and clarifies and paints a picture of who actually are the millionaires in the United States. What do they look like? Because I think that's part of the core problem behind imposter syndrome is that when we only view in our mind, when we make up this image of who the millionaires are, it's this untouchable, completely out of whack with reality vision of who millionaires around us are. When we step back and we look at the facts and we determine who they really are, it should help us clarify that they are not special. Okay. So when we start talking about millionaires, the first one I want to highlight just as the most important piece of this is that somewhere between 70 and 80% of millionaires come from homes, from households when they were raised that were lower middle class to lower class, which means they were not wealthy when they were growing up. That is the first myth that has to go away. We must break that image. You did not have to start with money to have money. If you're talking about 80% of the people who are now millionaires did not start anywhere near that level. And in fact, if they came from lower middle class or lower class families, there probably wasn't a lot of financial knowledge floating around in the household. There probably weren't a lot of discussions about money, at least not in a positive light. Might have been money anxiety, money concerns, but it wasn't something that was normally discussed. So no matter what your starting point is, you are not alone. In fact, you are in the far majority if you come from those lesser backgrounds when it comes to becoming a millionaire. Because, and this is the second piece of the equation, 88% of millionaires in this country, in the United States, are first generation self made millionaires, meaning they did not inherit their wealth. This idea that it's always legacy money is not true. Most millionaires came from lesser backgrounds financially and are self made. This is incredibly important for you to internalize. Whatever your starting position is, you're starting where everyone else started that became millionaires. 80% of them are college graduates. And I throw that out there simply because it does accelerate your earnings. There's a massive advantage to the college degree. Right now, there seems to be this, I'll say, movement or momentum in the United States to degree higher education, to talk it down and say it's not important. That's statistically nonsense. It is still very valuable to have a college education. Your career earnings is massively different, upwards of over $1 million in additional earnings when you have a college degree. I think that's important to keep in mind. One last thing to just give us a little bit of a flavor for who the millionaires are in their daily life. Most millionaires, somewhere between 60 to 70%, this gets a little fluid, but they drive Hondas and Toyotas. They're not driving BMWs and Mercedes and all these other expensive cars. They're driving reasonably priced, affordable, quality, longevity based cars. The reason that book became so massively popular when it came out was that it discouraged us from viewing millionaires as special. Instead, it emphasized just how normal they can be. I mean, the name of the book is The Millionaire Next Door. It's the person you don't even recognize or realize is a millionaire. And that's good in that those people have been responsible enough to grow their money. But it is painful because it means most Americans have a warped perception. The people we view as millionaires are the flashy millionaires. If they, in fact, are even millionaires in reality, they may just be flashy with their money and really be broke. Hence, pretty much everybody on social media. But it is critically important that you internalize the messaging today. You can be a millionaire. You absolutely can build wealth. You come from, regardless of your background, you come from pretty much the same starting point as all the other millionaires in the United States. If your family didn't have money, it doesn't matter. Most millionaires didn't have money. 80%, right, didn't come from money. 88% built their own wealth. There's nothing inherently special about millionaires in terms of their personality, their background, their traits, anything like that. Now, they did take some steps to move forward. And this is the part I do want to highlight for you. Again, I mentioned the college thing. That is helpful, but not required. There are certainly millionaires who did not go to college, have a trade, or whatever the case is. Those are all fantastic options as well. But what they did do is they built behaviors and habits. They were able to build over time through consistency. And I've already had the episode on automation. We'll obviously discuss habits multiple times over the course of the show. But it is critically important that you understand that what you can replicate from the millionaires is their habits. That's the piece that can make you the same as a millionaire. And when I teach this to my students, I try my best to use an example that frames them, the student, and myself. And clearly, I'm a little bit older, more established, further along in my financial path. But here's what I highlight to them. When they go to purchase a car, for example, there is a process to that. There is research that's done on what type of vehicle should you get, what color do you want? Do you want four-wheel drive? What brand do you want? How much do you want to pay? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is a process. It is a behavior that you must go through to make sure you get an appropriate, well-placed purchase. It is the exact same process that I have to go through. The only difference is the number of zeros on the purchase price, but that is irrelevant. That is just numbers on a piece of paper. The process is the exact same. Same thing for a house. You're going to find a realtor. You're going to research the market. You're going to find the school systems. You're going to determine how many bedrooms do you want? What size kitchen are you looking for? What layout do you like? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm doing the same thing. The process you go through as a new 25-year-old with less financial resources, and the process I go through as someone closing in on 50 with more resources, we'll say, those processes are the exact same. It does not change. And so if you can mimic the processes, the habits, the behaviors of the wealthy, then you create an inevitability that you'll follow in their pathway. And so this is the best way to overcome the imposter syndrome, is to begin looking at what can I get from them? What lessons can I learn? What can I take from that person and replicate so that I get closer and closer to their behavior and habits? The other piece that I would throw out there that is really important, especially if you have young children anywhere in your life, whether they're your own children or just people, nieces, nephews, whatever, somebody you have influence over, start exposing them to the financial world as early as you can in small bits as they can handle it, but give them access to these things. I began having my own children invest in an IRA when they were 12 or 13 years old. And now, as my kids are late teenagers, if you ask them how the stock market works, how mutual funds work, I don't know that they could give you a precise answer. They could give you a pretty decent estimation. But if you ask them the question, are you an investor? They would give you an emphatic yes, because they understand that is a part of their life. It is a part of who they are. They're never going to face that challenge of saying, I'm not a money person. They've learned to embed that into their personality. That's what my advice to you about young people would be, is begin introducing them. If you're dealing with a friend who's maybe a little bit older and they still have that same self-doubt, self-negative image of being an imposter in the money world, take the same approach. First of all, have them specifically identify the areas of the financial world where they're already involved. Do you have a bank account? Do you have a savings account? Do you have a CD? Do you have a retirement account at work? Whatever it may be, simply identifying those will begin to provide evidence. They cannot say, I'm not an investor, I'm not a money person, when they are quite literally dealing with financial tools and instruments on a daily basis. When you can show that to them, when you can highlight that and articulate it for them, then they can begin to sort of break through that barrier. And then from there, slowly start introducing more and more financial topics, more and more financial information, different tools, different resources, so that they can grow into it. But always keeping in mind that if you want to finish like the wealthy people, they are not special. They had better habits and better behaviors, and those can be mimicked. Those can be repeated, they can be learned, and they can be put in place in your life. I appreciate you joining me today. I sincerely hope that you're able to jump over the hurdle and start to view yourself as a money person. If you keep coming back to this show, I promise I'll get you there. We'll discuss every topic under the sun, and eventually you'll understand money one way or the other. Also, do me a favor and please share this with anyone in your life who you feel like might be struggling with this same situation, because we definitely want to get people moving in that direction. Have a great day, and I hope to see you next time.